So spring is here, which means for many of you currently studying, whether in school or university, exam season is upon us. Now, it has been a couple of years since I've had to sit an exam, but I have gone through the whole school system throughout an undergrad, a postgrad, and I'm now doing my PhD, which means I don't have exams, but I still have to do a lot of work. However, it does mean that I actually mark essays and exams, so I've now been on both sides of the equation and I have managed to get through so far. So I thought it was about time I did a video on how I revised for my exams that might be helpful for those of you who have exams coming up. And this video is very kindly being sponsored by Skillshare, who are an online learning platform that I have mentioned in a few videos in the past, where you can access tutorials and lessons on various different things, including, very aptly, those related to school and studies. So if you're looking for more revision advice after this video, I would highly recommend going and checking out Skillshare's website, but I will talk about them a little bit more further into the video. Now, my first piece of advice might be a little bit annoying to those of you who are already at the point of revising for their exams, but I couldn't not mention it because it's something to bear in mind in the future for those of you that are yet to sit your exams, and that is to keep good notes throughout term time. So if you're a university student, the notes that you take during your lectures are going to be one of the most important aids, or at least they were to me, for revising for exams. I incorporated my notes from my lectures into most of my revision, and I imagine lots of you will be the same. So the more notes you take during term, the less you will be frantically searching for during revision time, and the more material you will already have to hand. Even if you have to miss lectures, which happens to most of us, if you can sort of like go online, look at the resources provided to you by the person who is teaching that class, and make notes from their slides or their handouts, and do a little bit of reading, perhaps out of their recommended reading list, and just sort of make up for that lecture that you've missed, and then when you go back to revision, you will have, you know, some notes from each of the topics that may come up in your exam. Now, as I've already said, notes for me were one of my main revision tools, and something I found when I was revising was that reading wasn't enough. Things ingrained themselves in my brain so much better if I wrote them down. So one of the things I did for every single class I had exams for in university was rewrite out my notes. So I would sit down with my notes. I didn't tend to type out my notes, but it just depends on what kind of person you are. I liked handwritten notes, and I would sit down with my handwritten notes from my classes and essentially rewrite everything I had written down in my lectures in a notepad. So I would often have like one specific notepad for revision. So here's an example of what a notepad looks like if you don't know. And I would sit down, tackle one class at a time, and write down everything I'd written in my notes. And throughout the process of rewriting these notes, I would make edits, I would check the spelling of things I perhaps hadn't known how to spell when the lecturer mentioned them. I would add in little details or dates if I hadn't written those down, or felt that my rough hand notes weren't initially clear enough from my classes. I would perhaps leave out little things I'd written down that were irrelevant, and yeah, expand things here and there and just like clarify them. Then I would have these much neater, much more concise notes that I had recently written down, so they were recently so I had recently processed them in my head and I could read them back over, but I liked that I was rewriting those notes closer to the time of the exam. I felt like they went into my head better. However, something else I would highly recommend pre-examinations is to come up with a bit of a time plan. So the likelihood is many of you will be revising for more than one exam. So throughout most of my university career, except on my masters where I only had my Greek exams, I had to sit multiple exams during the exam season. And that ranged all the way, I think, from about 4 to 6 exams throughout my undergraduate. And that can seem incredibly overwhelming. So once you have the dates for all of your exams, I would sit down and make a little sort of like timesheet / plan for the month or two that you have to revise after teaching term has ended and exams are approaching. Think about what exams you have coming up first, so what do you need to prioritise revising first, and sort of schedule in time so that you can spend equal amounts of study time on each subject. And this means often you know, starting with your first exam, but then equally just before that exam happens, scheduling in more time for that a few days ahead so it's fresh in your mind. I often will not revise if I have an exam in an afternoon or evening. So if I have an exam one day, I will not revise the day I have that exam, before or after. I think it's very important not to rely on revising the day of an exam. You should hopefully have done all of your revision before, and anything you do on the day is just a little bit of extra and nothing that will stress you out. Equally, after my exam is over, take a little break, and that is something that is equally important to factor into your plan. So for me, starting early is always the way to go. This was how I dealt with essays, this is the way I dealt with exams. As soon as I could, I would be on it. I would have a plan to revise from the beginning of the revision period. However, I would factor in breaks, because it is equally important for your brain to continue functioning at its optimum that you take care of yourself, which means getting good night's sleep, which means eating properly, feeding yourself healthy foods, taking care of your body, and also factoring in downtime. And I think this is so important regardless of what aspect of studying you're involved in. I think downtime needs to be accommodated, whether it's during term time or during revision time. And that is something I think is easier done if you start early. So if you start your revision earlier, you're not cramming last minute, and you can factor in that downtime and sort of take care of yourself, your mental health, and do the best revision you can. So if possible, you know, make a plan, start early, and factor in breaks. Obviously everybody is going to be different when it comes to making their revision plan. Different things will work for different people. You might want to use online templates, you might want to write things out, you might want to make things really beautiful, or you might just want to like use a traditional calendar. But you can always make it fun and make it something you'll enjoy participating in if that's something that works for you. And in terms of making revision material, physical revision material, that sort of like works well with your brain and your thought process, and makes the whole process easier. There are so many lessons and tutorials on Skillshare that can help you with that, from different people, from different backgrounds, from different learning types, because we all learn differently. There is no one type of learner, and different things work for different people. So if you're looking for the best method for you and want to try out a few different things, then Skillshare is a good place to look for different advice on different methods, because obviously what I'm talking about here is what worked for me and an overview on the different things I use to revise, but not necessarily going into exactly how to plan a timetable. An annual subscription to Skillshare Premium is less than $10 a month, and if you're one of the first 500 people to use the link in the description box under this video, you will get a 2-month free trial. But how else did I revise? I was a fan of the classic flashcard when it came to university exam revision. So these are what I would use. They are like blank lined cards I would buy in bulk and use for specific classes. So for example, I studied ancient history and classics, and say I was revising for a philosophy class where I had to remember loads of different Greek philosophers. I would make flashcards with the philosopher's name, the dates they lived, their key like philosophical theories. Similarly, if I was trying to remember my Roman empresses, I would write down the Roman empress's name, I would write the dates she was alive, the dates she reigned, perhaps which emperor she was married to, other important family members, perhaps the goddesses that she was associated with and her propaganda, like key details, and look through them in chronological order. So I'd be like, okay, so this empress came first, boom, then this one, boom, and like test myself on that information. And like with note taking, I just found the process of writing down this information, particularly key details about individuals, very helpful in my revision process. And then if you do have friends in the same classes as you, you can use those flashcards together and make revision a little bit more fun and a little bit more communal and test one another. Similarly, if you are a language student, so I have experience with Greek language. I have studied ancient Greek throughout the years, and I have had to sit examinations in ancient Greek. I would do similar things with vocabulary. I would have vocabulary lists with the words in Greek and the words in English, and I would switch between the two, where I would read aloud the English words to myself or a friend would do it for me, and I would have to give the Greek word and vice versa to test my knowledge both ways, because I was expected to translate both ways. So I would do that when it came to the languages, and then when it came to grammar, for example writing out the forms that a noun took or a verb took, I would just write them out over and over and over again until they were ingrained in my head. You know, write it out multiple times on a page, turn the page, do it again, do it again. Like every morning, if you study a language alongside everything else, if you can just dedicate an hour every morning to writing out the most important grammar and making sure it's still in your head every day, then that is going to be something that you found so useful when it comes to the examination. You might also find making sort of diagrams or charts helpful. For example, when I studied philosophy, I would write perhaps the philosopher or the philosophical school in the centre in a bubble, and then do branches off of it summarising the key ideas and important pieces of information that I needed to know, and then I would just stick them up around my room so they were there, and I might just glance at them like, ah yes, that was what Pythagoras thought about this and that. And that worked for me. And last but not least, there's always practice exams. So when I was in school, way back when, doing my standard grades and higher in the Scottish school system, which I don't even think is the same now, you could buy past examination papers, and I would practice them, timed practices. I would often first do practices that weren't timed and then build up to timed practices. So I found that really helpful. And then when I was at university, what I found helpful often was either lecturers would give you past exams, or you could ask for them, or just maybe ask for a little bit of advice what would be the best things to practice. But one of the things that came up in a lot of my exams were gobbets or commentary passages. So we would get like a passage from a Greek or Roman text, and you would have to write a commentary on it. So I would practice by doing commentaries on passages we'd looked at in class. But that was generally how I revised for all of my exams. I can't really think of anything else that in particular that I did that stands out to me. But again, make sure to take care of yourself. Personally, I'm a get up early in the morning person and an early to bed person, but whatever works for you when it comes to times of day. But I think if you can get outside, if you can get some fresh air, if you can just, you know, take care of your mind and body whilst revising, that is going to be all the more helpful when it comes to examination day. So that is my advice when it comes to revising for your exams. Generally speaking, I did pretty well throughout my examinations. I am doing a PhD. I can't be entirely incompetent. So I hope this advice was useful to some of you. Thanks again to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. Do check out their website. And good luck to all of you that have exams coming up in the next few months. Bye guys!